The neighborhood of Willow Creek was the kind of place where people forgot to lock their doors. Tree-lined streets curved through rows of immaculate homes. Children rode bicycles until sunset. Retirees watered flowerbeds every morning. Nothing violent ever seemed to happen there. That illusion shattered on a cold October evening. At 8:17 p.m., a frantic 911 call came from the Mercer residence. The caller was Emily Mercer. Her voice was barely understandable through the sobs. "My husband, please. He's in the garage. Someone shot him." Police officers arrived within minutes. The moment they entered the garage, they understood why dispatch had sounded so shaken. Daniel Mercer lay on the concrete floor beside his black luxury SUV. 7 bullet wounds covered his chest and torso. Blood had spread beneath him in a dark pool that reflected the flashing red and blue lights outside. The attack had been brutal, personal, deliberate. There were no signs of a struggle. No evidence of robbery. Daniel's expensive watch remained on his wrist. His wallet sat untouched in his pocket. Whoever had come here hadn't wanted money. They had wanted Daniel Mercer dead. Detective Ryan Cole arrived shortly after the crime scene was secured. At 42 years old, Ryan had spent nearly 2 decades investigating murders. He had learned to trust instincts that couldn't always be explained. The second he stepped into the garage, one thought entered his mind. This wasn't random. He crouched beside the body while forensic technicians worked around him. Daniel's eyes remained partially open, frozen in what looked less like fear and more like recognition. As if he had known the person standing in front of him moments before the shooting began. Ryan studied the scene carefully. 7 shots. Not 1. Not 2. 7. That number mattered. People who killed out of panic rarely fired that many times. People who killed out of hatred often did. "Execution?" one officer asked quietly. Ryan stood. "Looks that way." Across the driveway, Emily Mercer sat wrapped in a blanket. Mascara streaked her cheeks. A paramedic remained nearby while she answered preliminary questions. Ryan approached slowly. "Mrs. Mercer, I'm Detective Cole." She nodded weakly. "Can you tell me what happened?" Emily wiped tears from her eyes. "I was inside. Daniel went out to the garage after dinner. A few minutes later I heard shouting." "Did you recognize the voice?" She hesitated. "No. What were they arguing about?" "I couldn't make out the words." Her breathing became uneven. "Then I heard gunshots." Ryan studied her expression carefully. Shock looked genuine. But years of experience had taught him that appearances often lied. "What happened next?" "I ran outside." Her voice cracked. "And he was already dead." Neighbors were questioned throughout the night. Several had heard raised voices shortly before the shooting. One neighbor reported hearing a man yell something that sounded angry. Another remembered hearing Daniel shout back. Yet none could provide a description. Nobody had seen the visitor arrive. Nobody had seen the visitor leave. It was as if the killer had appeared from nowhere. Hours later, Ryan entered the Mercer's home office. A technician pulled up security footage collected from cameras around the property. Ryan watched carefully. The timestamp moved forward minute by minute. Then a figure appeared. A man wearing dark clothing. What caught Ryan's attention wasn't what the figure did. It was what he avoided. Every movement seemed calculated. Every path carefully chosen. The individual remained just outside the camera's clearest angles. Whenever a face might have become visible, the person turned away. Almost as though he knew exactly where every camera was located. Ryan replayed the footage 3 times. The figure never once looked directly into a lens. "Interesting," he muttered. "What's that?" the technician asked. Ryan pointed toward the screen. "This wasn't luck." The technician frowned. "You think he planned it?" Ryan nodded. Whoever this is knew what he was doing. The investigation continued through the early hours of the morning. Forensic teams collected shell casings scattered across the garage floor. Most appeared ordinary. Until one technician made a discovery. Near the rear tire of Daniel's SUV sat a single casing containing a partial fingerprint. The print was rushed through the database. Ryan expected another dead end. Instead, the computer returned a match. The room fell silent. Ryan stared at the screen. The identified owner of the fingerprint was Marcus Hale, a former military contractor, officially deceased, declared dead 3 years earlier following an overseas incident. Yet somehow, a fingerprint belonging to a dead man had just appeared at the scene of a brutal 7-bullet execution. And Ryan suddenly realized the case was far stranger than anyone had imagined. The name Marcus Hale lingered in Detective Ryan Cole's mind long after the fingerprint report arrived. By sunrise, the murder board in the investigation room had already changed. Daniel Mercer's photographs no longer occupied the center alone. Beside them now hung a file containing the image of a man officially listed as dead. Marcus Hale, 39 years old, former military contractor, declared deceased 3 years earlier after a vehicle explosion during a security operation overseas. According to government records, no body had ever been fully recovered. The explosion had been severe enough that investigators relied largely on circumstantial evidence to confirm the death. At the time, nobody questioned the conclusion. Now Ryan was beginning to wonder if that had been a mistake. He spent the morning reviewing every document available. Military service records, contract assignments, travel histories, financial disclosures. Marcus appeared disciplined, intelligent, and highly trained. He had spent years operating in dangerous regions where deception often meant survival. The deeper Ryan dug, the less he believed Marcus was actually dead. By noon, he returned to the Mercer residence. Emily Mercer looked exhausted. Dark circles had formed beneath her eyes, and the shock of losing her husband still seemed to weigh heavily on her. Ryan sat across from her at the dining room table. "I need to ask about someone," he said. Emily nodded slowly. "Who?" Ryan opened a file and slid a photograph toward her. The moment she saw Marcus's face, Ryan paid close attention. Her expression barely changed. No surprise. No visible fear. No recognition. At least none she allowed him to see. "Do you know this man?" Emily studied the image for several seconds. Then she shook her head. "No. You've never met him." "No. Never heard the name Marcus Hale." Again she shook her head. "I don't think so." Ryan thanked her and ended the interview. As he walked back to his vehicle, something bothered him. Emily's answers had been perfect. Too perfect. Most people searched their memory when confronted with unfamiliar faces. Emily hadn't searched at all. Her denial came immediately. That didn't prove she was lying. But it certainly didn't prove she was telling the truth. Back at headquarters, Ryan shifted his focus toward Daniel Mercer. If Marcus had murdered Daniel, there had to be a connection. People rarely executed strangers with 7 bullets. For 2 days Ryan found nothing. Then a financial analyst assigned to the case made an unexpected discovery. "Detective," she said, entering his office. "You need to see this." Ryan followed her to a computer screen. A series of old transactions appeared. The records dated back almost 10 years. Several payments had moved between companies linked to Daniel Mercer and accounts associated with Marcus Hale. The amounts were substantial. Tens of thousands of dollars. Then hundreds of thousands. Over a 2-year period, nearly $1 million had changed hands. Ryan frowned. What kind of business was this? "We're still trying to determine that." Were the transactions legal? The analyst hesitated. "That's the problem." She zoomed in on several entries. Many descriptions were vague. Consulting fees. Security services. Private contracts. Nothing clearly explained why such enormous sums had been exchanged. The money trail raised more questions than answers. Ryan ordered subpoenas for additional records. As the files arrived, a hidden history began to emerge. 10 years earlier, Daniel Mercer had invested heavily in overseas development projects. Around that same time, Marcus Hale had been working private security contracts in the same region. Their paths had crossed repeatedly. Not once. Not twice. Dozens of times. The two men had known each other far better than anyone realized. Yet none of Daniel's friends, business partners, or family members had ever mentioned Marcus. It was as though someone had deliberately erased the relationship. Late that evening, Ryan sat alone reviewing newly delivered documents. Photographs, receipts, archived emails. Most seemed ordinary. Then he opened a folder marked private. Inside were several photographs recovered from an old storage archive connected to one of Daniel's former companies. Ryan flipped through them absent-mindedly. Business meetings, construction sites, corporate events. Then he froze. His eyes locked onto one image. A sunny beach stretched across the background. Palm trees swayed beside crystal blue water. Two people stood near the shoreline. One was unmistakably Marcus Hale. Younger. Smiling. Very much alive. The second person made Ryan's pulse quicken. It was Emily Mercer. Years younger than she appeared now. Standing close beside Marcus. Close enough that strangers would have assumed they were together. Ryan stared at the photograph in silence. Just 24 hours earlier, Emily had sworn she had never seen Marcus Hale before. Now he was looking at proof that she had known him years before she ever met Daniel Mercer. And suddenly the dead man's name had become far more dangerous than anyone imagined. The photograph changed everything. For several minutes, Detective Ryan Cole remained motionless at his desk, staring at the image of Emily Mercer standing beside Marcus Hale on a tropical beach. The picture had been taken at least 12 years earlier, long before Emily married Daniel Mercer. Yet one fact was impossible to ignore. She had lied. The next morning, Ryan returned to the Mercer residence carrying a copy of the photograph. Emily answered the door looking exhausted. Grief still shadowed her face, but when she saw Ryan standing there again, anxiety briefly flashed across her eyes. "We need to talk," Ryan said. Minutes later they sat across from each other in the living room. Ryan placed the photograph on the table. Emily's expression collapsed instantly. For several seconds, she simply stared at it. Then she lowered her head. "I knew this was coming." Ryan remained silent. The silence worked better than accusations. Eventually Emily spoke. "Yes," she whispered. "I knew Marcus." Ryan leaned forward. "How well?" Emily took a shaky breath. "We were together." The confession hung heavily in the room. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. "It wasn't casual," she continued. "We were in love." Ryan listened carefully. Emily explained that she had met Marcus while traveling with friends after college. Marcus had been charming, confident, and adventurous. He seemed fearless in a way that fascinated her. For nearly 3 years they maintained an intense relationship. They traveled together, made plans together, talked about marriage. According to Emily, those years had once been the happiest of her life. Then everything changed. "Marcus became different," she said. "What do you mean?" "He grew controlling." Her voice trembled slightly. "At first it was small things. Questions about where I was, who I talked to. Then he started checking my phone." Ryan made notes. Emily continued. "He wanted to know everything. Every minute of every day. And after that, he became angry when I spent time without him." Ryan could see the discomfort on her face. The memories were clearly painful. "I thought it was because he loved me." But Emily looked away. It wasn't love anymore. The relationship deteriorated rapidly. Arguments became frequent. Marcus grew possessive. The man Emily had once adored slowly transformed into someone she barely recognized. Eventually she ended the relationship and left. "That was over a decade ago," she said firmly. "I haven't seen him since." Ryan studied her carefully. "You expect me to believe that?" "It's the truth." "What about Daniel?" Emily shook her head. "Daniel came into my life years later." "Did Marcus ever contact you again?" "No." Ryan wasn't entirely convinced, but he moved on. "What happened after you left him?" Emily hesitated. "I heard things." "What kind of things?" "He wasn't handling it well." As Ryan continued investigating, he discovered she was right. Over the next several days, he tracked down people who had known Marcus during that period. The descriptions followed a disturbing pattern. Everyone remembered the same transformation. One former co-worker described Marcus as magnetic. People loved being around him, the man said. He could walk into a room and own it. But after Emily left, something seemed to break. He became withdrawn. Another acquaintance remembered growing paranoia. He thought people were watching him. A former friend described sudden mood swings. He'd be normal 1 minute and furious the next. The accounts painted a troubling picture. Marcus had not simply suffered heartbreak. He had unraveled. The emotional collapse appeared gradual but relentless. Years passed, yet many believed he never truly recovered from losing Emily. By the end of the week, Ryan felt increasingly certain that Marcus remained the prime suspect. A rejected lover. An obsession that never faded. A violent execution. The motive practically wrote itself. Yet something still felt incomplete. The story contained gaps. Important ones. Late Friday afternoon, investigators executed a search warrant connected to an old business address linked to Marcus Hale. The property appeared abandoned. Dust covered every surface. Most rooms contained nothing of value. Then officers discovered paperwork leading to a rented storage unit hidden under a false identity. Ryan personally accompanied the team. The unit sat at the far end of a massive storage facility. When the metal door rolled upward, everyone inside fell silent. Rows of boxes filled the space from floor to ceiling. At first glance, the contents seemed ordinary. Then an officer opened one of them. Photographs. Hundreds of photographs. Another box contained more. Then another. And another. Ryan picked up a stack and felt a chill run through him. Every image featured Emily. Walking through parking lots. Leaving restaurants. Shopping. Driving. Talking on her phone. Year after year after year. The photographs stretched back nearly a decade. Someone had been watching her almost continuously. And as Ryan stared at the endless collection, he realized Marcus Hale's obsession had never ended at all. The discovery inside the storage unit transformed the investigation overnight. Detective Ryan Cole had expected evidence linking Marcus Hale to Daniel Mercer's murder. What he found instead was something far more disturbing. An entire decade of obsession. The photographs alone filled dozens of boxes. Thousands of images documented Emily Mercer's life in astonishing detail. Some had been taken from across busy streets. Others appeared to have been captured from nearby vehicles. A few were close enough to suggest the photographer had stood only feet away from her. Every year of her life seemed preserved. Every movement recorded. Every routine observed. Ryan spent the following morning reviewing the material with investigators. The deeper they looked, the worse it became. Several boxes contained notebooks. Others contained flash drives. One wall of the storage unit held carefully labeled folders arranged by year. It resembled an archive created by someone who had dedicated years to a single purpose. Watching Emily. Forensic specialists began cataloging everything. Hours later, technicians recovered surveillance recordings from the flash drives. The footage showed Emily entering stores, meeting friends, and leaving work. Some recordings lasted only minutes. Others continued for hours. Many had been captured from hidden cameras. The date stretched back nearly 10 years. Ryan sat silently as one video played. Emily walked through a shopping center carrying several bags. The camera followed from a distance. The footage ended only when she drove away. Another recording showed her jogging through a neighborhood park. A third captured her eating lunch alone outside a cafe. The sheer volume of surveillance was unsettling. Whoever collected it had invested enormous time and effort. And almost certainly money. One technician removed a stack of journals from a box. The covers were worn from years of use. Inside, page after page was filled with handwritten entries. Most were signed with the same initials. Image. Marcus Hale. Ryan began reading. The early entries sounded emotional but relatively harmless. Marcus wrote about missing Emily, regretting arguments, wondering whether she might someday return. As the years progressed, however, the tone darkened. The entries became increasingly obsessive. Marcus described watching Emily from afar, tracking her routines, recording her habits, memorizing places she visited. One passage made Ryan uncomfortable. "She still belongs with me. She just doesn't understand it yet." Another was worse. "I know who influences her decisions. I know who stands between us." Ryan immediately recognized the reference. Daniel Mercer. The obsession was no longer focused solely on Emily. It had expanded. Investigators soon uncovered additional files dedicated entirely to Daniel. The folders contained photographs, addresses, vehicle registrations, and work schedules. Detailed maps documented Daniel's daily routes, meeting locations, business trips, gym visits, restaurant reservations. It looked less like curiosity and more like preparation, as if someone had spent years studying both husband and wife. Ryan arranged consultations with forensic psychologists assisting the case. After reviewing the evidence, their conclusions were troubling. One psychologist spent several hours examining the journals before speaking. "This isn't ordinary heartbreak." Ryan nodded. "What is it?" "A fixation that evolved into identity." The psychologist pointed toward the notebooks. "For years, Marcus appears to have built his entire life around Emily." Another specialist agreed. The rejection became part of his psychological structure. Ryan listened carefully. "Meaning?" "When she left, he lost more than a relationship." The expert folded her hands. "He lost the version of himself he believed existed with her." The years that followed appeared to worsen the condition. Isolation, resentment, humiliation, fantasy. All of it seemed preserved within the journals. The specialists believed Marcus had suffered a severe psychological breakdown fueled by obsession and unresolved rejection. If they were correct, Daniel's murder fit the pattern. An obsession left unchecked for years could eventually become dangerous, even deadly. By evening, Ryan felt more convinced than ever that Marcus Hale had pulled the trigger. The evidence was becoming overwhelming. Then another discovery changed everything. Near the back of the storage unit stood a small locked case that investigators had not yet opened. A technician finally managed to force it open. Inside were passports, identification documents, currency from several countries, and a collection of travel records. Ryan examined the papers carefully. Most used different names, different identities, different photographs. One document immediately caught his attention. An airline ticket, purchased under a false identity. The departure date froze him in place. 3 days after Daniel Mercer's murder. The destination required no interpretation. The flight left the country entirely. Ryan stared at the ticket while investigators gathered around him. After years of hiding in the shadows, Marcus Hale had apparently prepared an escape plan. And according to the travel documents resting in Ryan's hands, that plan had already carried him thousands of miles away. The airline ticket changed the investigation from a murder case into an international hunt. Detective Ryan Cole stood in the evidence room staring at the documents spread across the table. For months, investigators had treated Marcus Hale as a suspect hiding somewhere inside the country. Now that assumption was gone. If the ticket was genuine, Marcus had vanished across international borders only days after Daniel Mercer's execution. The timing was impossible to ignore. 3 days after the murder. 3 days after 7 bullets ended Daniel's life. 3 days after a man officially declared dead reappeared through a fingerprint left at a crime scene. Ryan immediately assembled a task force. Federal agencies became involved. International law enforcement partners were contacted. Marcus Hale was no longer merely a suspect. He had become one of the most wanted fugitives in the investigation. The search began with airport records. Investigators examined passenger manifests, surveillance footage, customs declarations, and immigration databases. The identity used on the airline ticket belonged to a man named Stephen Reed. The problem was simple. Stephen Reed did not exist. The passport number had been fabricated. The supporting documents were fraudulent. Even the address attached to the identity led to an abandoned property. Someone had built an entirely fictional person. And they had done it well. Ryan spent long nights reviewing travel records. Every discovery led to another false name. Another fake address. Another carefully constructed identity. The trail felt endless. 1 week later, financial investigators uncovered a breakthrough. Several dormant accounts connected to Marcus's former business activities suddenly became active shortly after Daniel's murder. Small transfers moved through multiple banks. Then those funds disappeared into foreign accounts. The pattern repeated again and again. Whoever controlled the money understood how to hide it. Ryan followed the transfers across several countries. The path wound through shell companies, private accounts, and offshore services. Each step seemed designed to delay investigators. Yet every trail eventually pointed toward the same region. South Asia. A specialist in financial crimes studied the records and pointed toward a map. "If I had to guess," he said, "that's where he went." Ryan folded his arms. "Can you narrow it down?" The analyst nodded. "Possibly." Several days later another report arrived. Immigration authorities identified a traveler matching Marcus's physical description entering a neighboring country using forged documentation. The individual remained there briefly before crossing into another jurisdiction. Then another. The route resembled a deliberate attempt to disappear. Finally, investigators reached a conclusion. There was strong evidence suggesting Marcus had entered Pakistan under an assumed identity. Nothing was definitive. No fingerprints. No confirmed photographs. No official admission. But the evidence continued pointing in the same direction. Ryan pinned a large map to the wall of the task force office. A red line traced the suspected route. At the end of that line sat Pakistan. For the first time since Daniel's murder, investigators believed they understood where Marcus had gone. The challenge now was finding him. News of the case exploded across international media. Television networks aired special reports. Crime podcasts released detailed investigations. Newspapers published photographs of Marcus beside images of Daniel Mercer. The story contained everything the public found irresistible. A brutal execution. A dead man who wasn't dead. A decade-long obsession. An international escape. The attention generated thousands of tips. Most proved useless. People claimed to have seen Marcus in airports, hotels, restaurants, and train stations across the world. Nearly every sighting collapsed under scrutiny. Yet the publicity created another problem. Marcus was likely watching. Ryan believed that if Marcus remained alive, he would be following every development. The possibility bothered him. Weeks passed. Then one rainy evening, Ryan returned home after another exhausting day. A package waited outside his apartment door. No return address. No identifying marks. Just a plain envelope. His instincts immediately sharpened. Inside he found a single printed sheet of paper. Nothing else. No fingerprints. No signature. No clues. Only 4 typed words centered in the middle of the page. Ryan read them once. Then again. A cold sensation settled in his chest. The message was short. Terrifyingly short. Because it suggested something Ryan had refused to consider. The words read, "You arrested the wrong man." And for the first time since the investigation began, Ryan wondered whether Marcus Hale was trying to run from the murder, or from the truth behind it. The anonymous message refused to leave Ryan Cole's mind. 4 days, the single sentence echoed through every part of the investigation. "You arrested the wrong man." Officially, no arrest had been made. Marcus Hale remained a fugitive and prime suspect. Yet whoever sent the message clearly wanted Ryan to question the direction of the case. At first he dismissed it as manipulation. A distraction. A desperate attempt to create confusion. But the more he examined the evidence, the more uncomfortable he became. Certain details no longer fit together as neatly as before. The obsession files proved Marcus had spent years watching Emily Mercer. The financial records connected him to Daniel Mercer. The airline ticket suggested he had fled the country after the murder. Yet something still felt incomplete. Ryan decided to start again from the beginning. Every photograph, every witness statement, every forensic report. Nothing would be assumed. Nothing would be ignored. 3 days later, a forensic analyst requested a meeting. Ryan arrived carrying a stack of case files. The analyst pointed toward a series of enlarged crime scene photographs displayed across a conference room screen. "We found something we missed." Ryan immediately focused. "What is it?" The analyst zoomed into the concrete floor inside Daniel Mercer's garage. Several shoe impressions became visible. Ryan recognized one pattern. It matched footwear associated with Marcus Hale. The second pattern did not. "Are we sure?" Ryan asked. The analyst nodded. "We rechecked everything." The room grew quiet. There were 2 sets of impressions. Ryan studied the images carefully. The second prints appeared smaller, lighter, less defined, but they were undeniably present. The analyst continued. "We also found trace fibers that don't match Daniel or Marcus." Ryan's pulse quickened. "A second person. We can't prove it yet. But it's possible. More than possible." Ryan leaned back slowly. For months the investigation had focused almost entirely on Marcus. Now the possibility of an accomplice threatened to change everything. The task force immediately expanded its review. If another person had participated in the murder, motive became more important than ever. Attention shifted toward Daniel Mercer himself. The deeper investigators examined his business empire, the darker the picture became. Daniel had publicly built a reputation as a respected entrepreneur. Successful, charitable, influential. Behind that image, however, investigators discovered troubling allegations. Former employees began speaking. Many had remained silent for years. Now they seemed eager to talk. One former manager described a culture of intimidation. He controlled people through fear. Another employee claimed Daniel collected private information about co-workers, sensitive secrets, financial problems, personal scandals, anything that could provide leverage. He always knew exactly what to use against you. Others described blackmail disguised as business negotiations, threats hidden beneath friendly conversations, career destruction aimed at anyone who challenged him. None of the accusations had ever resulted in criminal charges. But together they painted a disturbing portrait. The victim was far from innocent. Ryan spent hours reviewing testimony. The list of people with reasons to hate Daniel grew longer every day. Former partners, employees, competitors, even friends. The revelation complicated everything. Maybe Daniel's murder had not been solely about Emily. Maybe Marcus's obsession was only part of a much larger story. One evening Ryan met with a former executive who had worked closely with Daniel years earlier. The woman appeared nervous throughout the interview. Eventually she lowered her voice. People were afraid of him. Ryan waited. "Why?" The woman hesitated. "Because Daniel enjoyed controlling people." She stared at the table. "He collected weaknesses." Ryan remembered similar statements from others. What kind of weaknesses? The answer came immediately. Affairs. Financial problems. Addiction. Ryan wrote notes. The woman swallowed hard. If he found your secret, he owned you. The interview reinforced a growing concern. Daniel Mercer may have accumulated enemies everywhere he went. Weeks after the murder, investigators finally located a witness who had not previously come forward. The individual lived several streets away from the Mercer residence. At first the information seemed insignificant. Then the witness described seeing a vehicle near the crime scene on the night of the murder. Ryan showed several photographs. The witness studied them carefully, then pointed toward one image. That's similar to the car. Ryan's attention sharpened. Did you see the driver? The witness nodded slowly. A woman. The room fell silent. Ryan exchanged a glance with another investigator. Can you describe her? The witness did. Age, height, hair color, build. Every detail felt increasingly familiar. By the end of the description, nobody in the room spoke. Because the woman seen leaving the area moments after Daniel Mercer's execution sounded remarkably similar to his grieving widow, Emily Mercer. And suddenly Ryan found himself questioning whether the victim's wife had been hiding far more than an old relationship with Marcus Hale. The witness statement changed the direction of the investigation once again. A woman matching Emily Mercer's description had apparently been seen leaving the area shortly after Daniel Mercer's murder. Yet suspicion alone was not enough to build a case. Ryan needed proof. Unfortunately, proof never came. Months turned into years. The investigation slowed. Leads dried up. Witnesses forgot details. Evidence that once seemed promising reached dead ends. Marcus Hale remained missing. No confirmed sightings. No verified communications. No arrests. No answers. The case that had once dominated international headlines gradually faded from public attention. News outlets moved on. True crime documentaries focused on newer mysteries. The world continued forward. Ryan Cole could not. 9 years passed, but the murder never released its grip on him. The photographs from the storage unit still occupied shelves in evidence rooms. The journals remained locked away. The anonymous message haunted him more than ever. "You arrested the wrong man." Sometimes Ryan found himself staring at those words for hours. The possibility that he had misunderstood everything became increasingly difficult to ignore. His obsession carried a cost. Professionally, his reputation began to suffer. Supervisors encouraged him to move on. New cases demanded attention. Resources became limited. Yet Ryan repeatedly returned to Daniel Mercer's file. Each time he believed he was finished, another unanswered question pulled him back. Co-workers noticed. Promotions passed him by. Special assignments went elsewhere. Eventually younger detectives began handling investigations that once would have belonged to him. The damage extended beyond work. His marriage slowly deteriorated. For years his wife, Lauren, had tolerated the late nights and endless case reviews. She understood the burden detectives carried. At least initially. As time passed, understanding turned into frustration. Frustration became distance. Distance became silence. One evening she finally confronted him. "We haven't had a conversation in weeks." Ryan barely looked up from a stack of documents. "I'm working." "You've been working for 9 years." The word struck harder than he expected. Lauren stood in the doorway. Tired. Heartbroken. Angry. "That case has taken everything." Ryan wanted to argue. Instead he remained silent. Because deep down he knew she was right. Several months later she left. The divorce became final the following year. Afterward, Ryan spent even more time alone with the investigation. The empty apartment only amplified the obsession. By the 9th anniversary of Daniel Mercer's murder, the case was officially considered cold. Unsolved. Inactive. Forgotten by almost everyone. Then the phone rang. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Ryan was reviewing archived evidence when an investigator from another jurisdiction contacted him. "We received a strange report." Ryan listened carefully. "What kind of report?" "A witness claims to know something about Marcus Hale." Ryan immediately sat upright. The name alone was enough. Within hours, arrangements were made for an interview. The witness was a middle-aged engineer who had spent years working overseas. He appeared nervous from the moment he entered the room. Ryan introduced himself. "You said you've met Marcus Hale." The man nodded. "I think so." Ryan leaned forward. "Tell me everything." According to the witness, several years earlier he had worked on a development project in a remote city. The location was far from major population centers. Foreign visitors were uncommon. One resident had attracted attention because he seemed different from everyone else. Reserved. Careful. Educated. The man used a different name. A different background. A different identity. Yet something about him never seemed genuine. The witness eventually saw an old news report featuring Marcus Hale. The resemblance had stunned him. Ryan's pulse quickened. "You're certain?" As certain as I can be. What happened after that? The witness hesitated. He disappeared. Ryan exchanged glances with the investigators beside him. The story sounded promising. But after 9 years, promises meant little. Proof mattered. Only proof. The witness slowly reached into a folder he had brought with him. I wasn't sure if this would help. He removed a photograph and slid it across the table. Ryan picked it up. The room fell silent. The image showed several workers standing together outside a building. Near the back stood a man wearing sunglasses. Older. Thinner. His beard had changed. His hair was different. But the face was unmistakable. Marcus Hale. Alive. 9 years after Daniel Mercer's murder. And for the first time in nearly a decade, Ryan finally had a trail worth following. The photograph reignited a case that had been fading for nearly a decade. For the first time in 9 years, Detective Ryan Cole possessed something tangible. The image was recent. The witness appeared credible. Most importantly, the man in the background looked unmistakably like Marcus Hale. Within weeks, Ryan secured authorization to travel overseas and verify the lead personally. The journey felt surreal. For years Marcus had existed only as a ghost inside files, evidence boxes, and unanswered questions. Now Ryan was following a path that might finally lead to the man himself. After several flights and days of coordination with local authorities, Ryan arrived in a remote city identified by the witness. The location was far removed from the places Marcus had once inhabited. The streets were crowded but peaceful. Markets bustled with activity. Children played soccer in dusty open spaces while shopkeepers greeted familiar faces. Nothing about the city suggested it was hiding one of the most wanted men in Ryan's investigation. The witness had provided an address connected to the man believed to be Marcus. Ryan approached cautiously. Years of disappointment had taught him not to trust assumptions. The neighborhood was modest but well maintained. Residents seemed to know one another. When Ryan began asking questions, the responses surprised him. An elderly shopkeeper immediately recognized the photograph. Yes, he said. I know him. Ryan's attention sharpened. What can you tell me about him? The man smiled warmly. Good person. Ryan frowned. Good person. The shopkeeper nodded. He helps people. That answer was not what Ryan expected. Over the following days, Ryan spoke with numerous residents. Again and again he heard similar descriptions. The man used a different name now. Most locals had no idea who Marcus Hale was. To them he was simply a respected member of the community. A teacher at times. A volunteer at local charities. Someone who quietly assisted struggling families. One neighbor described him as deeply religious. He never misses prayers. Another praised his generosity. When my son was sick, he helped us. Others recalled him organizing community projects and donating money anonymously. The portrait forming before Ryan's eyes was almost impossible to reconcile with the evidence collected years earlier. This man did not resemble the violent fugitive described in police files. He did not sound like an obsessive stalker capable of executing someone with 7 bullets. Ryan reviewed the information repeatedly. Each conversation created new doubts. Every positive account conflicted with the image he had carried for nearly a decade. One evening, he sat alone in his hotel room studying old case files. Photographs of Daniel Mercer covered the desk. Nearby rested copies of Marcus's journals and surveillance records. The evidence had always seemed straightforward. Obsessed former lover. Years of stalking. A brutal murder. A calculated escape. But now the story felt less certain. Ryan began questioning assumptions he had once considered facts. What if Marcus truly had stalked Emily? What if he had suffered a psychological breakdown? Neither automatically proved he had murdered Daniel. The distinction mattered. For years investigators had treated motive as proof. Perhaps that had been a mistake. Ryan arranged another meeting with a local resident who knew the man believed to be Marcus particularly well. The conversation lasted hours. Eventually Ryan asked the question directly. Have you ever seen him become violent? The resident looked genuinely confused. No. Angry. Everyone becomes angry sometimes. I mean dangerous. The man shook his head. Never. Ryan left the meeting with more questions than answers. That night, an unexpected message arrived at his hotel. No sender. No signature. Only a brief instruction written on a piece of paper delivered by hand. If you want answers, come alone. A location and time followed. Ryan immediately suspected a trap. Yet instinct told him otherwise. The next evening he followed the directions. The meeting place sat outside the city near an abandoned structure overlooking a quiet stretch of land. As darkness settled, Ryan waited. Several minutes passed. Then footsteps approached from the shadows. A man emerged slowly into view. Older than the photographs. Thinner. Weathered by years of hiding. But unmistakably Marcus Hale. For a moment neither man spoke. 9 years of questions stood between them. Finally Marcus broke the silence. I know why you're here. Ryan's eyes never left him. Then save us both time. Marcus looked toward the horizon before speaking again. What he said next shattered everything Ryan thought he knew. I didn't kill Daniel Mercer. Ryan remained motionless. Marcus met his gaze. I never fired a single bullet. And suddenly the entire case seemed ready to unravel. The words hung heavily in the darkness. I never fired a single bullet. Detective Ryan Cole stared at Marcus Hale, searching for any sign of deception. For nearly a decade, Marcus had existed in Ryan's mind as a murderer, a fugitive, and the center of an obsession that had cost him almost everything. Now the man was standing only a few feet away, calmly dismantling the story that had defined those years. Ryan folded his arms. If that's true, start talking. Marcus remained silent for a moment. The wind moved across the empty landscape surrounding them. Finally, he spoke. You've spent years looking at the wrong version of events. Ryan's expression hardened. Then give me the right one. Marcus nodded. Daniel Mercer wasn't who people thought he was. That statement alone wasn't surprising. Over the years, investigators had uncovered numerous allegations involving Daniel. Former employees had accused him of manipulation, intimidation, and blackmail. Marcus claimed those accusations barely scratched the surface. According to him, Daniel had built an empire by controlling people. Business associates, employees, friends, even romantic partners. Anyone who possessed something valuable became a potential target. He collected secrets, Marcus said. Ryan remembered hearing those exact words from former co-workers. Marcus continued. If he learned your weakness, he owned you. The years after Emily left had been difficult, Marcus admitted. He did not deny the obsession. He did not deny the surveillance. He did not deny following Emily for years. I was broken. The confession came without hesitation. I couldn't let go. Ryan listened carefully. Marcus's honesty about his own behavior made the rest of the story harder to dismiss. According to Marcus, his obsession eventually led him to discover things Daniel never intended anyone to find. Financial fraud, hidden accounts, bribery, coercion, evidence that Daniel had manipulated numerous people behind the scenes. Some lost careers. Others lost marriages. A few lost everything. The more Marcus investigated, the more dangerous the situation became. Ryan interrupted. Why not go to the police? Marcus laughed bitterly. With what? He shook his head. Most people were too afraid to testify. That explanation matched previous witness statements. Fear had surrounded Daniel for years. Marcus claimed he eventually confronted Daniel directly. Not once. Several times. The meetings became increasingly hostile. Threats were exchanged. Warnings delivered. Neither man trusted the other. Then came the night of the murder. Ryan focused intensely. This was the moment that mattered. Marcus took a long breath. I was there. Ryan wasn't surprised. The evidence had already established that. What happened? Marcus looked away briefly. When I arrived, Daniel was already arguing with someone. Ryan's pulse quickened. A second person. Marcus nodded. I stayed outside at first. The argument inside the garage grew louder. According to Marcus, Daniel seemed genuinely frightened. Not angry. Afraid. That detail caught Ryan's attention immediately. Fear suggested something very different from the confrontational businessman described by witnesses. Marcus continued. I heard shouting. Then came the gunshots. 7 of them. One after another. The sound still seemed to disturb him even years later. Ryan waited. What did you do? I ran. The answer came instantly. Marcus claimed he entered the garage moments after the shooting. Daniel was already dead. Blood covered the floor. The shooter was still present. Ryan's heartbeat accelerated. Who was it? Marcus hesitated. For the first time during the conversation, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. I panicked. Ryan frowned. What happened next? Marcus admitted moving through the garage. Touching objects. Leaving traces behind. The fingerprint on the shell casing suddenly made sense. I shouldn't have been there. His voice lowered. I knew nobody would believe me. Fear took over. Years of obsession with Emily made him the perfect suspect. Marcus understood that immediately. Instead of reporting what he had seen, he fled. The decision haunted him every day afterward. Ryan struggled to process the story. Parts matched existing evidence. Other parts raised entirely new questions. Most troubling of all, Marcus seemed sincere. That did not mean he was telling the truth. But it did mean Ryan could no longer dismiss the possibility. Years of assumptions suddenly felt unstable. The entire case appeared balanced on a knife's edge. Ryan took a step closer. If you didn't kill Daniel, then tell me who did. Marcus remained silent. Several seconds passed. Then he slowly lifted his eyes. When he finally spoke, the answer struck Ryan harder than anything he had heard in 9 years. The name sounded impossible. Unthinkable. Yet Marcus delivered it without hesitation. Emily Mercer. And in that instant, every certainty Ryan still possessed began to collapse. Emily Mercer. The name followed Ryan Cole throughout the flight home. For 9 years he had pursued Marcus Hale across continents, evidence files, and unanswered questions. Now, after a single conversation in the darkness, the entire investigation had shifted beneath his feet. Marcus's accusation could have been a lie. A desperate attempt to redirect blame. A calculated manipulation. Yet Ryan could not ignore one troubling reality. Too many pieces of the story suddenly fit together. Within days of returning home, he formally requested a comprehensive review of every piece of evidence connected to Daniel Mercer's murder. The request was controversial. Many investigators believed the case had already consumed enough resources. Others privately thought Ryan had become obsessed again. Ryan understood their concerns. He ignored them. If Marcus was lying, the evidence would expose him. If Marcus was telling the truth, then a murderer had escaped justice for nearly a decade. Neither possibility could be ignored. Boxes of archived evidence were brought back into active review. Witness interviews were re-examined. Digital records were restored. Old statements were compared against one another for the first time in years. At first, nothing changed. Then small inconsistencies began to appear. An investigator reviewing phone records discovered something unusual. Emily's communication history contained several unexplained gaps. Entire periods of activity appeared to vanish. Messages had been deleted. Accounts had been removed. Contact logs were incomplete. Normally, that alone would not prove anything. But when forensic specialists recovered fragments from older backups, a different picture emerged. Several communications linked Emily to anonymous accounts that investigators had previously failed to identify. The dates stretched across years. Not months. Years. Ryan studied the recovered data late into the night. The timing disturbed him. Some messages appeared during periods when Emily publicly claimed she had no knowledge of Marcus Hale's whereabouts. Others occurred shortly before major events in the investigation. The pattern felt deliberate. Hidden. Carefully maintained. A A forensic analyst entered Ryan's office carrying additional reports. "You need to see this." Ryan followed her to a conference room. Large screens displayed timelines comparing communications, financial activity, and witness statements. The overlap was impossible to ignore. Emily and Marcus had not been completely separated after their relationship ended. Indirect contact continued for years. Not constant. Not obvious. But enough to establish a connection. Ryan stared at the data. She lied. The analyst nodded. Repeatedly. The discoveries accelerated. Investigators reopened interviews with former employees of Daniel Mercer's companies. Many witnesses were older now. Less fearful. More willing to speak. One former executive described Emily as far more involved in Daniel's business affairs than previously understood. Another recalled witnessing intense private arguments between husband and wife. A third remembered Daniel expressing paranoia during the final year of his life. He thought someone was setting him up. Ryan immediately focused on that statement. Did he say who? The witness shook his head. No, but he seemed terrified. The interviews exposed a hidden layer beneath Daniel and Emily's marriage. Publicly they appeared successful. Privately the relationship was deteriorating. Financial disputes became common. Trust vanished. Several witnesses described emotional manipulation occurring on both sides. Secrets. Threats. Control. The marriage appeared built on far more resentment than anyone realized. As evidence accumulated, a shocking pattern emerged. Emily had spent years presenting different versions of herself to different people. To Daniel, she appeared loyal. To friends, she appeared trapped. To investigators, she appeared grieving. To Marcus, she appeared unreachable yet never entirely gone. The contradictions were impossible to ignore. Ryan began suspecting something deeply disturbing. Marcus had not been the only person manipulating events. Someone else had been influencing both men. Carefully, patiently, over many years. The breakthrough came from a forgotten storage drive recovered during the original investigation. At the time, technicians failed to access several damaged files. Modern recovery software succeeded where earlier efforts had failed. Hours later, investigators gathered around a monitor. An audio recording began playing. The voice quality was poor. Background noise distorted parts of the conversation. Then Ryan recognized the speaker. Emily. The room became silent. Everyone listened. The recording appeared to capture a private conversation years before Daniel's murder. Emily sounded calm. Focused. Cold. As the audio continued, Ryan felt his stomach tighten. Because the discussion was not about reconciliation. It was not about fear. It was not about escaping an unhappy marriage. It was about planning. Calculating. Waiting. Then came the sentence that froze everyone in the room. A clear statement preserved for nearly a decade. Proof that changed everything. Emily's voice emerged through the speakers. "I've been planning Daniel's death for years." And suddenly Ryan realized the final confrontation was no longer a question of if, only when. The recording changed everything. For nearly a decade, Detective Ryan Cole had chased fragments of a story buried beneath lies, obsession, and manipulation. Now, for the first time, he possessed evidence that directly connected Emily Mercer to a plan that had begun years before Daniel Mercer's murder. The problem was simple. Emily had disappeared. Within hours of the recording's discovery, investigators learned she had emptied several financial accounts and abandoned her residence. Ryan immediately recognized the warning signs. She was preparing to run. A national alert was issued. Transportation records were reviewed. Financial transactions were monitored. Every available resource focused on finding her before she vanished permanently. For 3 tense days, nothing happened. Then a credit card linked to one of Emily's hidden accounts was used at a small coastal hotel. Ryan personally joined the arrest team. The drive lasted several hours. Rain pounded against the windshield the entire way. No one spoke much. Everyone understood what was at stake. 9 years of unanswered questions had finally led to this moment. The hotel overlooked a grey stretch of ocean. Waves crashed against dark rocks below the cliffs. Ryan watched from the parking area as officers quietly moved into position. When the signal came, they entered. The arrest happened without violence. Emily sat alone near a window overlooking the sea. She did not resist. She did not appear surprised. In many ways, she looked relieved. Ryan entered the room moments later. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Emily smiled sadly. I wondered how long it would take. Ryan pulled out a chair. Longer than it should have. The conversation lasted for hours. At first, Emily denied everything. Then investigators played portions of the recovered recording. Her confidence slowly disappeared. The walls she had spent years building finally began to crack. Eventually the truth emerged. Not all at once. Piece by piece. Painful piece after painful piece. Emily admitted she had manipulated both Marcus Hale and Daniel Mercer for years. Marcus's obsession became a tool. Daniel's arrogance became another. Whenever conflict arose, she quietly encouraged it. Whenever distance appeared, she closed the gap. The process stretched across years. Carefully, patiently, deliberately. Ryan listened in silence. The details were disturbing. Emily described feeling trapped long before Daniel's death. She claimed Daniel's controlling behavior and hidden corruption destroyed their marriage. Yet instead of leaving, she chose another path. A darker one. By the time the murder occurred, resentment had transformed into something far more dangerous. Hatred. The investigation ultimately concluded that Emily orchestrated events leading to Daniel's death. Her manipulation fueled Marcus's obsession while simultaneously exploiting Daniel's fears. The consequences were catastrophic. One man ended up dead. Another spent 9 years hiding from authorities. Countless lives were damaged. The aftermath spread far beyond the people directly involved. Daniel Mercer's reputation collapsed as evidence of corruption became public. Former business partners faced investigations. Financial records triggered lawsuits. Careers ended. Companies dissolved. Marcus eventually cooperated with authorities. His years of stalking, surveillance, and deception became impossible to ignore. Although investigators accepted he had not pulled the trigger, his actions contributed to the tragedy. The obsession that consumed him carried consequences of its own. Ryan watched the entire case unravel in courtrooms, interviews, and public reports. The truth finally emerged. But truth did not feel victorious. Too many people had suffered. Too many years had been lost. Justice arrived carrying a heavy price. Months later, after Emily's conviction, Ryan finally allowed himself to step away from the case. The investigation that had dominated nearly a decade of his life was officially closed. For the first time in years, the silence felt unfamiliar. Then the package arrived. It appeared on his desk one morning with no return address. No sender. No explanation. Ryan immediately felt a familiar unease. Carefully, he opened it. Inside was a flash drive. Nothing else. Curiosity overcame caution. Minutes later, he loaded the file onto a computer. A video began playing. The footage came from a previously unknown security camera. The timestamp matched the night of Daniel Mercer's murder. Ryan leaned closer. The image quality was poor but usable. The garage appeared on screen. Daniel entered. Moments later, another figure approached. Then another. Ryan frowned. The second figure matched evidence already known. But the third did not. The individual remained partially hidden in shadows near the rear of the garage. Watching. Waiting. Present before the shooting began. Ryan's pulse quickened. The video ended abruptly before any gunshots were heard. No identity could be confirmed. No face became visible. Only one fact remained undeniable. A third person had been there that night. Someone never identified. Someone never questioned. Someone never mentioned by Marcus or Emily. Ryan stared at the frozen image long after the screen went dark. The case was officially solved. The courts had spoken. The evidence had been accepted. Yet one final mystery remained buried inside the shadows. And for the second time in his career, Ryan found himself staring at a truth that refused to stay buried.